Good morning to both of you. Thank you so much for joining me as we're going to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion and leadership as part of a Smarter Workplace Awareness Month. And so I'm very fortunate to be joined by two amazing experts and trend champions for SIOP's Top Trend Workplace Trends for 2021. I've got Tony Cooley, if you would introduce yourself, please.
Hi, thank you for having me. So my name is Tony Cooley. I'm an HR professional. I have around 8 years of experience specializing in people analytics, employee listening, measurement, research design, strategic workforce planning, and I hold a master's degree in IO psychology from St. Cloud State University.
Thank you. And also joining us, Kisha Jones. Kisha?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kisha Jones. I'm an assistant professor of management at Florida International University's College of Business. I do research on diversity and inclusion in the workplace, and I got my PhD in IO psychology from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign.
Very nice. And I'm Erin Bowen. I'm the Thompson Professor of Leadership in the Psychology Department at the University of Texas at Arlington. And I got my PhD in IO psychology from St. Louis University in Missouri. So thank you both for joining us. One of the reasons we wanted to get together today and talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, and leadership is because we noticed that with SIOP's 2021 top 10 trends, a lot of T's there, that diversity, equity, and inclusion concerns and issues really spanned across multiple trends. And that made it really sort of one of the foundations that seems to underpin what's important or what we're perceiving as important in IO for the coming years. So why do you two think that DEI considerations stretched across at least 3 of the top 10 trends this year?
Well, I could start. I think that it's mainly because of just the conversations at the national level about diversity and inclusion and social justice. And so with that, we saw, through social media and just from the public in general, people kind of calling out to companies that they either support as customers or work for, just to speak out and help support efforts to address things like police, murder of Black individuals, and like George Floyd protests and everything related to that. And so I think it was such just a strong conversation in 2020, and it had been discussed beforehand and kind of getting to that point. But I think it's something that SIOP, and seeing this need and knowing that these are topics that SIOP can help address and inform the public about, and practice and research, it contributes to the conversation and help to promote change. I think that's why we saw it present across multiple areas, just kind of addressing how it's not just diversity and inclusion. Usually it's like, one thing or one area, but there's different ways that it could be addressed. So recognizing that and setting up a way for us as SIOP members to be, and the public to be informed about what IO psychologists could do.
Right. Tony, what about you?
Yeah, so in my first quarterly updates, I placed a lot of focus on this exact question, which is, I think, Kisha, as you mentioned, like it's been such a hot topic in the popular press, and I think some of the things that we're seeing is this kind of call to action from applicants and candidates, from employees, and then you also have kind of large corporations that hold a lot of influence over companies that are also kind of having that call to action. I made reference in my article to large investment firms like BlackRock and State Street Global Advisors who are saying, hey, we want to see you guys have a little bit more transparency in your DEI metrics. We want to see progress. So really calling out on companies to enact some change. Mm-hmm. You also see government agencies like the SEC who is saying, hey, we're going to try to influence this through public policy reform. Other companies, Glassdoor is such a popular website for candidates who are looking at prospective organizations. And what's interesting is recently they have this kind of filter where you can see, how do males feel about this company in terms of a couple different factors, and how do females feel about it, and do they feel differently? So it's an interesting take, and I think everyone's being part of that conversation.
Yeah, I would have to agree with both of you, and I think it's sort of a hopeful sign that DEI considerations were spanning the top 10 trends, because hopefully that means that this starts to become embedded in the work that we do and isn't just sort of a temporary response to what we're seeing in the news, but is going to really become part of what we do with organizations moving forward. But now, Tony, you mentioned a couple of places where you're talking about using recruiting tools or using asking about metrics for organizations. So does that mean that DEI issues are only for leaders and supervisors to worry about? How do we, who might be rank and file employees or work with sort of the rank and file employees, what are we doing to support diversity, equity, and inclusion? And how do we in IO then help those rank and file folks?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. I think management and senior leadership teams, they definitely get the bulk of the attention when it comes to impacting DEI within their organization. Perhaps it's because they have large spans of control, larger budgets, or just a larger influence over decisions and strategy that might impact DEI. But I think from an individual contributor perspective, you can play a really big role. And one opportunity might start with understanding, what decisions or influence do I have within the scope of whatever control that I have. Maybe you're helping identify a new coffee vendor for your local office. So who are you going to interview and request RFPs from? Is there an opportunity for you to look into companies that are potentially owned by underrepresented groups or folks that don't necessarily look like you? Another opportunity, if thinking about like the projects or things that you're working on within your organization, say that you're creating an employee survey, preparing to deliver a presentation, or perhaps designing a business process, you could ask yourself, who can I include within that project or seek feedback from along the way, who might not, look like me, might not have the exact experiences and background that I have, and who might provide different perspectives for this process or project.
Right. I know when I first came to UT Arlington and was getting my training on what I could purchase and when I could purchase it and all that good stuff, they actually have policies in place regarding looking for what they call historically underutilized businesses, and that they would prefer that we, where possible, make purchases and look to go with businesses and partners who are representative of groups that have historically been underutilized. And I think that's a really interesting and sort of baseline strategy, in a small way to help support those types of initiatives by showing that the actions matter. Kisha, what are your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I totally agree with Tony, and it's nice to hear your example as well, Erin, about how your university is trying to be proactive in supporting businesses that haven't been as utilized. But I'm also thinking, at the employee level of like, personal development. So taking opportunities to learn about people that are different from you, developing like perspective taking and curiosity, and just other ways to, I think, help build relationships and, build bridges with other people, just being more proactive about that. And also like what Tony said about like, seeking input and advice, or maybe in a meeting, being saying, oh, this what this person said. If you feel like it's like ignored or kind of being swept, people are moving on from it, just highlight it again. So kind of being, have ally behaviors that can help to support people who aren't as represented in organizations. Because I know one news topic or just thing I kept seeing that was recurring, especially given the context of the pandemic and working from home, is that there were like differences, especially by like race, in terms of who was like excited or ready to return to work. And in some cases, employees of color felt like working at home was easier, just in terms of being able to focus on the work and not have to worry about kind of the social aspects and, exclusion, things of that nature that could happen. And so I thought that was really interesting because it kind of illustrates the different experiences that people can have in the workplace, depending on their background. And so understanding that, and I mean, companies can certainly help support employees in, developing some of the things I mentioned, but also employees can take it on themselves to see that as a priority in order to, just learn to just build relationships with others and understand others and their perspectives. And I think that'll also help in terms of the work that's being done, because if you build those relationships and those networks, that can help, infuse ideas, different approaches, can help people feel, more comfortable voicing their opinions. And that gets to like the benefits of diversity, where you have, all of these voices that are being providing input and suggestions that are heard and considered, that then will have an impact on, what the company is trying to do. So anything that could be done in order to help facilitate, just working together better, I think.
Yeah. Now, Kisha, you are the trend champion for inclusive practices to get, keep, and grow talent. Is that correct?
Yes.
So what does diversity, equity, and inclusion have to do with hiring and keeping the best of the best employees and getting that talent in there and retaining that talent and unleashing their full potential?
Yeah. I think as far as like, hiring and retaining top talent from a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective means recognizing that, the talent pool and the potential for high quality talent is broadened when you try to attract and select a diverse set of candidates, or use that as like the applicant pool from which you're drawing from. And so I think that means going outside of the box in terms of who you're bringing in or attracting or trying to apply for the job to get in the pool in the first place. And I think given just the changing dynamics as far as some companies being more lenient around remote work, or not even returning to work, or making a policy around returning to work, that broadens the talent pool in terms of who the company has access to outside of just who's local to the company or who's willing to move. And so I think that's a great opportunity for companies to just consider talent from all over the country, all over the world, just because it's kind of like we're in a completely different situation, a different way of approaching at least recruiting and hiring diverse talent. And so with LinkedIn and just all the different ways that people are able to promote their skills and everything they could bring to the table, now that location is becoming less of an issue, I think that's something for companies to take advantage of. And then there's also the retention piece. And so I think through that, just really ensuring that, especially if you are, taking advantage of remote workers, like, okay, what can be done in order to help people, whether they're, physically present or they're remote workers, in order to have them feel a part of the organization, feel like they're part of the mission, feel like they have, success there, potential for success. You can really see a future and feel valued by the company. And so all that is going to be important, especially in this new context where we can take advantage of diverse talent, like kind of from all over.
So now, Tony, with with what Kisha described, how do you see IO psychologists specifically playing a role in incorporating DEI and having it play a role in recruiting and keeping our high potential, top talented employees?
Yeah, that's a great question. I certainly echo a lot of the ideas that Kisha mentioned. I mean, I think we as IL psychologists, we're trained in performing research, understanding research, and having our methodologies grounded in that research. So I think we can bring a unique perspective to say, hey, here's what the research is saying around what might be working in terms of attracting talent and retaining talent, and more specifically, what might help in terms of doing either of those things for historically underrepresented groups. Mm-hmm. Putting my analytics hat on, I think it just creates further opportunity to say, what practices internally are we seeing that are helping to attract maybe BIPOC employees or female employees within any given role, or what might help you retaining them? So one example would be, what benefits are we offering, and how are those benefits being utilized, and taking it a step further to understanding, are these benefits attracting the talent that we want to bring in the door, and are they also helping us retain that talent?
Awesome. Well, I'm actually going to switch gears here for a second and share with you all something. Let's see if I can. I want to share my screen. I want to share orientation slides. There we go. So hopefully you all can see this. Yep. Gilbert Series. All right. So this was a sequence of 3 comics that ran in August of this year, where the characters in the Gilbert comic strip have a little encounter with diversity discussions in the workplace. So as you're all reading these, and as our viewers are looking at these, you'll see that I believe his name is Ashok. That's what I think the Gilbert creator has said the pronunciation is. But he is an intern there in engineering at this firm, and as you see in each of the comics, he comments on a lack of diversity and gets promoted to senior engineer, gets promoted to senior management, and then eventually is named co-CEO because his primarily white male employers have panicked when he just mentions a lack of diversity. So what can leaders do to prevent their employees or their stakeholders from mistaking the DEI initiatives that they're putting in place, like the bosses of the Gilbert comic strip mistake?
I know one thought I was having in reading this was that I don't know, I kind of saw it like as a bit of like a devaluing of the expertise and knowledge base needed in order to help effectively promote diversity in organizations and set up initiatives. And I know this is a comic. I'm not like saying like I'm comic. I'm just, but I've also heard this from friends who work in industry where like they feel like they don't have enough resources in order to successfully implement programs, and they're also being asked like kind of to ask the world like can you do this, can you do that, and just not having the support, whether it comes from having like additional staff or budget or whatever that is needed in order to help effectively implement strategies. Because here it's like, okay, this intern who is kind of pushed up the ladder, and I mean this is from the perspective of like representation, but also it's like it takes resources in order to be effective in and really just seeing the ticker change in terms of progress. And so we don't want to just like do things just to do things. We want to do things because we know that they're going to be effective and they're going to get results. And there's the resources behind it. There's top leadership voicing support for it. There's all of these things in place. So it's like we don't want to minimize what it takes, because this is continues to be a problem.
Right.
I also thought about the just some of the articles I've seen in the news around just a lot of companies who made pledges last year after the George Floyd protests and Black Lives Matter, and saying like, okay, nothing's really changed. You said you were going to do all this stuff. Right now, we're a year later or over a year later, what's been done. And that illustrates the challenges of it, that this is a problem that continues to persist. And so, yeah, it's something that, you know, companies need to take seriously. And I think it's great that we see the increase in like chief diversity officers, just positions that are accountable to the CEO, just kind of illustrating that, okay, this is a priority for this organization and it's important for the strategy and the goals that it has.
Right.
But yeah, it's like, I guess, long story short, my main point is that it's like we really need to have the resources available in order to effectively implement practices and not just let it be something that you just do just because.
Right. Tony, what about you? What can leaders do to prevent employees or stockholders or stakeholders from viewing DEI initiatives as just the way that these bosses in Gilbert do?
Yeah, so when I read this, I think, you know, this company, it sort of feels like a numbers game. Like, oh, if we have this person in this position, then we're good from a diversity perspective. But I think that can be really short-sighted if we only focus on the numbers or the quota per se. I think the numbers are important. They're helpful. They're good for us to understand where are we at and where do we want to be. But then I think we need to engage with leaders to help them, you know, understand those numbers, understand the actions and behaviors that are needed to drive that change and drive towards those targets, and really seeking that sustainable level change versus just temporary improvement. I think kind of going back to that rank and file question that I think you had, one thing employers can do is start small and be iterative. Start with that foundation of just understanding what are the different facets of DEI, and having those building blocks in place. So, you know, one example might be, you know, if your employer is having employees take some level of inclusivity training, maybe it's around microaggressions. What you're doing is you're starting to give employees that foundation, those building blocks to recognize and have the self-awareness around their behaviors, and giving them those broad stroke tools to perhaps course correct in the moments, whether it's in the office or at home or whatever organization they belong to.
Right. I really liked your comment that, you know, the metrics are a starting point. The metrics are not the ending point. And I think that's important, especially because, Tony, aren't you the champion of implementing strategies and measuring progress on DEI and belonging?
Yes, I am.
So we understand that SIOP members are seeing measuring metrics regarding DEI and belongingness is important, but I think it's essential that we sort of emphasize that notion that it's a starting point. We can't live and die by the metrics, and like Kisha was saying, it's really got to come down to the institutional support and being given the tools to succeed, and not just putting somebody like Gilbert's intern into a position and then sort of hanging them out to dry and then saying, oh well, we tried,
Right.
and the system didn't work. So what are the last things I'd really love to hear from both of you as we're thinking about, what are the top 10 trends going to be next year? How is DEI going to fit into those trends? Is from an IO perspective, what is missing in the DEI research?
I can start. I think, Kisha, you might have a more comprehensive perspective, but I think from a practitioner standpoint, it seems like a lot of the research is focused on gender, ethnicity, age, perhaps, and I think maybe not considering other facets of diversity, like disability, for example, or perhaps like intersectionality of of those demographics. So, how are the experiences different for, say, BIPOC females versus white females, as opposed to just looking at that male-female difference?
Mm-hmm. Kisha, what about you? What are your thoughts? What do we need in the research?
Yeah, I agree with Tony's suggestions, and it's nice to hear from the practitioner perspective, just in terms of like, what's going on and what are the challenges that are being faced. So I think understanding the experiences from an intersectional perspective is important, and also understanding how organizations can incorporate intersectionality in terms of understanding, like for instance, Tony's comment before about like how do benefits or the presence or absence of benefits, have a differential impact on groups, but looking at that as at an intersectional level as well, like how can companies do that? I think that understanding the impact of remote work on different groups of people and how the implications of that for whether it's career mobility or success, like are there going to be differences in terms of like how much their contributions are valued, or issues with communication. So just kind of understanding if we're going to be moving to this remote context more and more, what implications do those have? And then finally, I'll say from a selection perspective, I think with just companies having an increased interest in developing more inclusive environments, thinking about how those can be created. And one area is with selection. I think that like a lot of companies, given their valuing of diversity and their emphasis on it, it's like they could consider it kind of as a competency, just whether it's like intercultural competence or just the aspect that involves the wanting to work together better or do more to work together better. If it's a competency or something that the company wants to have present within their company, is that something companies can select on? How can we develop measures for that, as well as training from a training perspective? So really just thinking more about what work or what research can be done to help understand how companies can build and develop inclusive climates and cultures.
Right. Well, we've talked about a lot of different components of DEI and leadership as they sort of cut across our top 10 trends. Now that we've gotten to the end, if we've got our listeners and our readers who have, sort of had half an ear out for the last little bit here, if you had one thing that you would want somebody, an IO professional, to take away from this conversation, that they can say, okay, that is what I need to be thinking about as I'm implementing or involved with or even tangentially connected to DEI issues. I'm a practitioner, I'm a researcher. What's the one takeaway from this topic? And Tony, let's start with you.
Well,
keep it short.
So I think there's oftentimes a bit of a disconnect or a bit of a lag maybe between kind of the academic world and the practitioner world. I think things are happening in the business, evolving rapidly, and then also in the academic world, that same rapidness is happening, but perhaps a little bit differently. So I think one thing is like, how can we better connect almost those two different worlds so that we can better collaborate? Maybe practitioners can point towards academics to say, here's the hot topics that are coming, here's the things that we're anticipating that are coming up. So how do we start building that framework for research and having that groundwork in place? And for academics, looking at the practitioners, for some of that same thing. I think both of
so the science and the practice need to come together once again, right?
Yeah. I think both could benefit quite a bit from that.
I am always a fan of that. Kisha, what about you? One key takeaway. It's a complicated topic.
Yeah. I'm like, okay, what can I say that'd be the one thing that would be the takeaway? Well, one thing that's coming to mind is how, I guess, as we progress, like issues related to diversity and inclusion and equity, like they aren't going anywhere. So this is like a, something that, we'll have to continue to work through and build on. And so, yeah, it's not like optional, like it's something that we have to face. I think not only just as a society, but also as from a business perspective, just the benefits of diversity and just with just it being a competitive advantage, being able to effectively utilize it. And so it could sometimes seem like an overwhelming problem or something that is like, okay, throw your hands up, like, how are we going to address this? So I would just say, like, it's here to stay. It's here to deal with. Don't give up hope. Like we can, we can all like contribute our ideas and even think more about it from a research perspective. Like if you don't study diversity and inclusion, but you study a topic, like, okay, can you think about it from a diversity perspective? Can you collaborate with other people? Because it's like diversity it's kind of been seen as like a subtopic or like a topic within like IL psychology, like it's a week in a course, it's a topic that we study, but it's really about people. It's about all of us, everything we bring to the table. So I think thinking about it that way, like it's here to stay, and it's something that it can be I think integrated into other areas or topics of study because it's at the end of the day it's about people.
Right. And I would even go a step further and not say it can be, it ought to be.
Yeah.
And I think that really brings us back to the whole reason we started this panel, which is we noticed that DEI considerations had stretched across at least 3 of the other identified trends. Mm-hmm. And so, and I think in some ways it's a good thing that we didn't say that DEI by itself was a separate trend.
Right.
We did say we have one about strategies and progress and measurement on DEI, but the concept itself, and I think that really gets back to your point, Kisha, and I think it makes a really great final point for us, which is it's not going anywhere, and it is about people and organizations, the whole core of SIOP. And so pulling that together, you can't ignore it. You can't treat it like a subcomponent in a curriculum or in a sub office in your organization. It's really going to cut across everything. Yeah. So thank you both for joining me to get to talk about this morning. I'm really excited to add this to the Smarter Workplace Awareness Month resource list, and hopefully we'll get some good feedback from our fellow IO psychologists out there. Yeah. Thank you both very much, and I am now going to stop recording.